Hello everyone, it's Chip Boaz, and today on the Jazz Lowdown, I'm going to be talking about the Newport Jazz Festival. Newport Jazz recently released the lineup for their 2024 weekend of shows that's happening August 2nd through August 4th. When I saw it, I was left with one question. Isn't this a jazz festival? On one hand, there were some amazing jazz acts. Everyone from Samara Joy to Christian McBride, Artemis, and even a tribute to the legacy of Wayne Shorter with Danilo Perez, John Patitucci, Brian Blade, and Ravi Coltrane. And that's just the start. There's actually a long list of fantastic jazz artists performing. People like Kenny Barron, Jonathan Blake, Anat Cohen, and more. I saw that and I was like, this is definitely a jazz festival. But then I was looking at the headliners. They include acts like Andre 3000, Nile Rodgers and Chick, Elvis Costello, and LaVey. Oh, but wait, that's not all. There's Thievery Corporation, Corey Wong, Galactic, and Ghost Note. I saw that and I was like, wait a minute. Is this a jazz festival or not? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if we call it a jazz festival, a pop festival, a funk festival, a hip hop festival, or anything else that we could label it. This is going to be a great weekend of music. And honestly, as a West Coast guy, I'm a little bummed out that I won't be able to be there to experience it all. But I have to admit, I do get hung up on the name. This is the Newport Jazz Festival. And they are promoting some artists that are distinctly not jazz artists. I guess it really shouldn't matter, but I've got voices in my head, and they talk to me constantly. It's like two conflicting voices. On the one hand, there's this guy. This is not jazz. They're doing a disservice to the jazz community by having all these artists that haven't dedicated themselves to the tradition. This is a crime against jazz, and I'm not going to stand for it. And on the other side, there's this guy. Dude, just chill out. Music is music. It doesn't all have to be jazz. Artists should be able to experiment and collaborate and just make music. If they want to get a little jazzy here and there without studying, who cares? Don't be a downer. Don't stomp on my creativity. And, they talk to me and I think, well, they're both kind of right, That's why this is hard for me to figure out. It's a little bit of an issue, but something I think I've got some ideas around. So stick around to the end of the video to hear my thoughts about ways to maybe fix or change or evolve with this. But let's start by going through this together, because this is not a new thing for the Newport Jazz Festival. The Newport Jazz Festival has been around for a long time. In fact, it's celebrating its 70th year in 2024, and that's a major accomplishment. This is a festival that has been around and has influenced jazz for a long time. The first Newport Jazz Festival was held in 1954 at the Newport Casino in Rhode Island. It was billed as the first annual American Jazz Festival, and I gotta be honest, they weren't wrong. This was a heavy lineup that included folks like Dizzy Gillespie, Ella Fitzgerald, Oscar Peterson, Lee Konitz, Billie Holiday, George Shearing, and a lot more. It was a huge hit, but not without some controversy. It moved around a little bit over the next few years, and it got quite a bit of pushback from the wealthy Newport community. There were some issues that you could consider valid, things like traffic congestion and crowds on the street, but what it really came down to, unfortunately, was racism against the mostly African American performers. But despite all of that, George Wine, the promoter behind Newport Jazz and the organization behind it, continued the festival all the way through the 50s. And each year, it just grew in popularity and grew in attendance each year. Now let's stop and think about that for a minute, okay? It's important to remember that at that time in the 50s, jazz was popular music. It had a little bit of a rebellious edge to it. Rock was still in its early days at that point, and there wasn't really any sort of competition. People were all in on jazz, so you have a big festival across multiple days where jazz is going. It drew crowds, and it just kept continuing to draw crowds. Now, when it got to the 60s, the festival continued to grow, moved to various venues around New York, and in fact, the biggest problem with the festival that it just kept getting too big. People just wanted to come and hear great jazz. It was a phenomenon. And you should really check out, there's even a movie that captures, I think it's the 1958 festival called Jazz on a Summer Day, that really gives you a sense of what it was like at that time. So this kept going on until 1969, and this was a watershed year for the festival because it was the first time Newport Jazz stepped out of exclusively promoting jazz for the first time. So you had serious jazz acts still. You had people like Miles Davis, Art Blakey, Bill Evans, and a lot more. But alongside that, you had groups like Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Sly and the Family Stone, and Led Zeppelin even. This was interesting because at the time, the Newport Jazz Festival didn't need these groups to bring in crowds. It was more of an artistic idea about bringing people together that I think had a lot of merit. Think about what it did for the artists as well. Miles was moving into fusion at the time, and this interaction with pop and funk artists only fueled that fire. It was really the direction jazz was going. But again, the crowds were too big, and it caused some chaos in the year. You move on into the 70s, and the Newport Jazz Festival struggled with the same question I'm asking now. Should they have a purely jazz festival, or should they mix in rock and pop acts? Now, at this point, there were a lot of considerations. The popularity of jazz was dwindling a little bit. People's musical interests were shifting more towards rock and pop. And there was competition because there were other festivals happening across the country at this point. So Newport needed to bring in revenue. And at this point, it ended up needing to bring in rock and pop acts. This came to a head in the 80s and 90s as financial considerations forced the festival to take on a wide range of sponsors, everyone from the cool cigarette brand to most prominently JVC, who changed the whole name of the festival to the JVC Jazz Festival. And it became heavily reliant on pop and rock acts. Things have changed as we've moved into the 21st century. They continued to have jazz and pop acts, but in 2016, bassist Christian McBride was named artistic director, and a lot of really interesting things have happened over the past, 8 years. And that's where we are now. So So, the Newport Jazz Festival has been mixing jazz and pop acts for decades. This is nothing new. I shouldn't be surprised. So, what's the big deal, right? Well, let's look at it from both sides of the table. Let's ask my voices in my head. Let's start with this guy. Pop stars are taking slots that could go to jazz artists. By having the pop artists there, that means that less jazz artists get this high profile opportunity to be seen and heard. Beyond that, Newport holds a largely respected spot in the jazz world. They have a lot of influence. Their endorsement of pop stars over jazz artists tell the world that it's okay to push jazz to the side. And at the end of the day, it waters down jazz. When jazz artists mix with pop stars, the language gets diluted and we lose the history. And then, of course, there's this guy. Hey man, let's face it, people like pop music. They come to the festival to hear the pop stars. They sell lots of tickets. And you know what that means? That means jazz artists can get paid fairly. They can benefit from all the money being brought in by the pop stars. And honestly, it gets people to the festival. No one's gonna go and listen to a bunch of stodgy old jazz. They want to hear new and cool music, right? So they go to the festival and then they might stick around and hear some of your old jazz artists and they might like them. Who knows? It's exposure. It's a good thing. And the most important thing, this allows all sorts of artists to mix and mingle and spend time with people they might not normally spend time with. It's about creativity, man. It could lead to a whole new adventure in music. It's all so confusing, right? What's the answer? I'm going to be honest here. I don't think there is one right answer, but I do have some ideas about how we could move forward and support on both sides. Should I care if the Newport Jazz Festival has pop artists at the top of its lineup? Well, I've listened to the voices in my head, and I have to say, yes, I think I should care. But I should care for reasons that you might not expect. I think we should take some of the money put towards the pop artists on the lineup and put it towards jazz promotion and education. Newport Jazz creates some amazing educational resources that are available on their website. If you haven't seen that, check it out. The sessions that they hold are fascinating and really thought-provoking and worth checking out. I'd like to see an extension of that. If they could be a little bit more aggressive with getting jazz in front of people and helping more of the public build a connection with the music, I think that would be beneficial. Maybe even partner with organizations like Jazz at Lincoln Center, SF Jazz, and Bilongo to make sure that we make the most out of this push. This might be an oversimplification, but I think it could help. The next thing I think we should do, I think we should embrace this cross-collaboration between pop and jazz artists that happens at Newport and maybe even take it further. I'm saying, yes, keep the pop artists playing alongside the jazz artists. But what if we did it just a little bit differently? What if when the pop artists were hired, we paired them with the jazz musicians and challenged the team to make a new one-of-a-kind project that might only ever be heard at the Newport Jazz Festival? Can you imagine the music that might come out of that? Can you imagine the demand for people wanting to go to Newport to hear that? I think that would be amazing. And even better, what if Newport supported this with resources to make live recordings, live video, and all sorts of things to give these artists the option to push this project into the future? Newport has been a place where projects have been born and collaborations have happened. Why don't we make that even deeper and push it into the future? I think that could be pretty powerful. These are just some thoughts that I think are worth exploring. I'd love to hear your opinions on this. Do you think that Newport, or any jazz festival across the country really, should have pop artists in the mix alongside jazz artists? What do you think is good and bad about that? Or what do you think Newport or festivals should do to support jazz, to create atmospheres that inspire collaborations? Tell me down in the comment section and let's come up with some ideas to push this into the future. And of course, if you're enjoying this, if this inspires you to think about jazz in a different way, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you can see all the things coming in the future. And we can keep talking about jazz, how it's made, how it comes out into the world, and so many other things. I'd love to have that conversation with you. Until next time, folks, thanks for being here. I'll see you soon.